welcome back to the channel for my post-season special for Season 11, Let's Look Back. Like the halftime special and first look, I do this for every season, and this is basically my formal review of the season and my look back on it. I'm going to start by talking about the status of the popular theories that were discussed about the season, and whether they were proven or disproven. And I'm only going to be discussing Ice Chapter theories since we discussed Fire Chapter theories in the halftime special. Then I'll be sharing the things I liked most about the season and the things I disliked most. Let's get started. The idea of Zane being the Ice Emperor was first suggested when the minifigure's face was revealed back in April or so. People began to note the connections, but this theory didn't gain relevance again until the end of the Fire Chapter. This ended up being proven, and there was quite a lot of evidence to prove it too, such as identical soundtracks, similarities with their staffs, and design too. In the end, Zane the Ice Emperor ended up being the same character. The Ice Chapter reveals that Zane has fallen under the influence of the Skrull and Vex also, who convinces him to take control. Using his new corrupted powers, he becomes the new ruler of the Neverrealm for several decades. I'm glad this one ended up being true because it's an awesome idea and was executed fairly well. There's also Vex though, and when people first saw him in episode 16, it was definitely noted that he was a pretty manipulative guy, and people suspected that Vex was the true villain and controlled the Ice Emperor. This is somewhat true. Vex is one of the main villains for the Ice Chapter and is the true mastermind behind the plan. While the Ice Emperor is the brains, Vex is the brains. Vex was usually able to persuade the Ice Emperor to listen to him during the season, and this would often include sending attacks or punishing people. But Vex does not have full control. The Ice Emperor is sometimes able to resist this, such as in episode 28 when he sends Lloyd to prison instead of killing him. While Vex is a main villain and was responsible for the creation of the Ice Emperor, he doesn't have complete control over him, so that's why I'd say this theory is somewhat true but not completely true. Next up is the concept that time would be faster in the Neverrealm, and this was absolutely true. It is revealed in episode 28 that time actually does work differently. This theory first came up at the beginning of the Ice Chapter as justification for the Ice Emperor's decades-long rule. It was supported by an old tweet of Time Andrason's that confirmed that time and logic is different in other realms. Since the Ice Emperor had been ruling for decades, this seemingly squashed the idea of Zane being the Emperor, since Zane was only banished a few days ago. This seemed to support an argument against Zane being the Ice Emperor, but this theory was confirmed and it makes total sense. I like that they used one of these Twitter-explained theories in the show, and it definitely makes the Neverrealm more unique. Although it is a shame that by season 12, all these new characters will probably be long dead. And huge kudos to the people who came up with this theory. It's pretty good and definitely not something one would think of at first glance. People had thought that Lloyd and Nikita could be the next ship, and when it was kind of revealed in episode 30, people have since went ridiculously crazy over it. In the finale, Akita kisses Lloyd in one of the final scenes, which makes everyone automatically think that they are in a romantic relationship. Pretty ridiculous that this is all it takes to consider something a ship, but that's an entirely different video. Akita and Lloyd, or Lloydkita as it's been called, is being considered the next Ninjago ship by the community, and people have been loving it so far. It serves as a follow-up to Lorumi in a nice way. Lorumi was one riddled with trust issues, and while Lloydkita starts that way, it progresses differently and shows that Lloyd has both kept a Season 8 development, but it also grown in a way. However, I don't personally consider this a ship. Again, it's pretty ridiculous that this is all it takes to consider something the next Ninjago romance. It was a one-way kiss. I see them as friends, not boyfriend and girlfriend as you like to think of them, especially when you consider that Akita will probably be dead by the time of season 12. Regardless though, I thought it was a nice story for the reasons I've explained. So who was the mysterious prisoner? The show wanted us to think Zane, but we're smarter than that. The prisoner was later revealed to be Kitaru, Akita's brother. At first, people including myself had thought Akita herself could be the prisoner, but this soon became impossible with episode 18 featuring Akita and 23 revealing her human form. By the time episode 24 came around and we were introduced to Kitaru, who was a pretty important seeming character, people began to speculate that he was the prisoner, especially since his fate wasn't actually shown. The leaked episode 29 description essentially confirmed this. He later teamed up with Lloyd and would be reunited with Akita at the end of the season. Unlike the other theories, the prisoner's identity was definitely not something that had been successfully guessed earlier in the season, considering people didn't even know Akita had a brother. Having discussed the main theories, we're now going to transition to the second part of the special. Let's talk about the good parts of the season now. Alright, this season has the best concepts of any Ninjago season yet, and excellent designs and sets to complement that. I loved the idea of fire and ice when it was done in Chima, and the concept was even cooler in Ninjago. I especially loved how they incorporated the Serpentine into this, and the fire snakes looked absolutely stellar. Same goes for the Ice Samurai, especially with the Ice Emperor's white color scheme. A lot of the story and in-show concepts were excellent as well, particularly Zane becoming the Ice Emperor. We finally had a villain that was actually one of the ninja, and this is much more interesting than just yet another evil guy. And the sets themselves were amazing too. I love the land bounty and the Titan mech, and the concept of the castle as well. And I also like the idea of Esphira being an ancient sorceress, with their regal golden colors, and Vex being a formling, with the creepy looking mustache and the glowing eyes. Man, the designers have really outdone themselves. Esphira is a bad villain, and the Pyro Vipers are boring and generic. but the Ice chapter makes up for her. The Ice Emperor and Vex aren't the best villains, but I'd say they're pretty good, and if Ninjago can keep this up, they'll be in good shape for villains in the future. The Ice Emperor is so cold and robotic, and his voice acting conveys that wonderfully. He reminds me a lot of Season 8 Garmadon, and I think that's great. They basically took the robotic side of Zane and expanded that into its own character. It's an excellent concept for a villain and executed well. And for Vex, it's so easy to hate him, which is what people love. Part of that is due to the voice acting. He's voiced by the Samurai actor, and this is his only other role since then. Vex's voice acting is probably the best part of his character. It really helps to add to his manipulative and deceitful personality. Let's face it, similar to Asphira, Vex is also just a pure evil villain, which isn't that interesting on its own, but it's other aspects like voice acting that makes him a lot better of a villain. Now that we've talked about the main strengths of the season, let's take a look at its main weaknesses. Rushed plot and filler tend to be on opposite ends of the pacing spectrum, but never did I think that a season would do both. This season suffers heavily from filler, particularly monster fights, which this season uses way too much. We have fights with the beetle, the bird, the rock monster, the preeminent, and 2 with the dragon, which is ridiculous. This new format definitely seems to encourage filler more, especially with these creativity episodes that try out new styles. It's a lot easier to break away from the main plot with the new format, and this season precisely does that on numerous occasions. As a result, the time from the main plot is taken away, and this leads to that getting very rushed. Zane single-handedly defeats Asphira and her entire army of Pyro Vipers in about 30 seconds. The Ice Emperor, after having ruled for decades, is also purified in seconds. Vex doesn't get the conclusion he deserves, many characters are underdeveloped, you get the point. Because of how much filler they included, the story consequently is rushed and a lot of aspects don't get enough focus as they should have had. Which brings me exactly to my next point. The important stuff that should have been focused on more isn't, and that's not okay. For instance, the season is titled Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu, but we barely learn anything about the art itself, and this ends up being a side element of the season. It should have been focused on a lot more considering the season's title implies that the season is all about Forbidden Spinjitzu. Also, we don't learn a single secret about it. We already knew it corrupts because of 2017's Book of Spinjitzu and the fairly obvious implications of the name. The huge problem is the backstory, or lack thereof. Who thought it was a good idea not to explain its backstory? Other aspects that weren't focused on enough include Vex and the Ice Emperor, who were good but needed a lot more screen time and then they would have been even better. Instead, the season prioritizes its filler episodes and thinks that they will be a much better idea. And lastly, the handling of the Powerless Arcs for Kai and Nia. And let me just say, Kai is at his absolute worst in this season. His story is not written well at all, and as I've said before, it's not an arc. It does not have the structure of a story arc. Instead, it's a bunch of different events that are pretty weakly strung together. Kai's gone from being one of the most serious and relatable characters to a whiny little toddler, and this is just so saddening to see what they're doing to Kai. His story is meaningless, and I feel that he took nothing out of it. Nia's isn't awful, but it is really weak, and it feels way too similar to Season 5. Sorla's involvement only makes things more annoying. Nia's arc has a grand total of 3 scenes, which isn't enough to deliver a compelling arc. Both of these are poorly done character stories. I understand that the new format isn't as mature in terms of tone, but they do not have to dumb down the characters this much. By doing this, they are removing the complexity that the characters had, and that the last 10 seasons developed, and that's not okay. Also, there is the lack of originality in both. We've seen Powerless Arcs so many times in the series, and if nothing is done to distinguish them from past arcs, then the final result won't be memorable. And that will conclude our reflection of Season 11, Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu. There was so much potential for the season, and it was painful to see that so much of it was thrown down the drain. This is probably my least favorite season and installment of Ninjago yet, even worse than Day of the Departed. The characters all feel significantly downgraded from the last season, as does the tone and the show itself. I would probably have to give this season as a whole a 3.5 out of 10. 2019 has been a relatively weak year for Ninjago, and here's to a better 2020 and Season 12. I don't think this new format is doomed to fail. If they get it right, I know that they can make it work, and when Season 12 releases, I hope I can say that's the case for it. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share with anyone ever you know. Let me know your thoughts on the season and what I've said also. And I'm not done with my post coverage yet. There's still a few more videos to go, and I also want to make a 3-part video explaining those 3 major problems I mentioned in depth, so stay tuned for more news about that. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.